answers.
Just change the file names to the name of the presenter so they know.
Yeah, I think they already know it, so I'm doing it in the case.
I've changed the file name.
Okay, so
And at least name is like IDC and then
okay, and
just write the reason.
okay, I'm going to grab those things.
Yeah, you have 15 minutes, yes. Yeah, this is on. Okay, I guess we should start. This is the, I don't know, 4th or 5th year running that that Jonathan and his colleagues assigned the largest lecture room to the Pakistan program. Now, I don't know if this is their expectation that we will always fill up this hall. And I have always requested that we be given a smaller room. It's much better to have standing room audience rather than large number of empty seats. But we continue to get this hall. So, yeah, I really think that it would help the discussion if people did move down. Okay, so we have 4 very interesting papers coming out of the Pakistan research program. Our first paper is on a monetary policy framework for the State Bank of Pakistan. This work being done jointly with the senior staff at the State Bank of Pakistan is now found itself being used by the State Bank in the design of its monetary policy. The second paper, Bureaucrats and Personalities, Experimental Evidence from Pakistan. The third paper is Merit-Based Transfer and Posting Schemes, all in the area of state capability. And then moving on to the theme of firm capability, we have understanding productivity in the Pakistani garment sector, comparisons with Bangladesh pilot project. So those are the 4 papers. What we'll do is I will request the presenters to make their presentations, and then we'll ask discussants, because each topic is a little different, so we'll ask discussants to comment on the paper, and then we'll have a brief question answer after each paper. So let's start with Professor Ehsan Chaudhary's paper on a monetary policy analysis in Pakistan, a model for monetary policy analysis. Thank you.
Okay, so I first would like to say that I'm very happy to participate in this session in Pakistan, and I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss some recent work which I've done with Hamza Malak at the State Bank of Pakistan. And in this work, we are going to highlight 2 features of Pakistan economy which we believe have important implications for monetary policy in Pakistan. The first feature, which is similar to many other emerging countries, is that credit markets in Pakistan are less developed. So this means that there's a weak link between changes in policy rate and the borrowing rate, which is used for investment. Second, financial markets in Pakistan are not well integrated with global markets. So this means, of course, that if you change policy rate, you have little effect on capital flows and on the exchange rate. So we want to examine here what influence these type of frictions have on the effectiveness of monetary policy in stabilizing output and controlling inflation. And for this purpose, we have to use a model. We're going to use a DSGE model, which extends and modifies the conventional model to incorporate features that are specific to Pakistan and which has been calibrated to data in Pakistan. So I'm going to first very quickly, just to provide a background, very quickly go over the macroeconomic conditions in Pakistan. Then I'll provide a brief description of the model. And then this model has many applications, but I'll just, given the short time I have, focus on one application. Just get a quantitative assessment of how monetary policy affects output and inflation and how the frictions reduce its effectiveness. And then I'll end with some concluding remarks. So in the fiscal year, actually, there are some visible improvement. There is some good news. I should note here that this data that I'm going to discuss, mention, covers the fiscal year, so it does not include the potential effect of recent political events or recent floods. But I'll just, focusing on that, there is improvement in inflation, in monetary growth, fiscal deficit, GDP growth, and in the balance of payment situation. So all of these have shown some improvement in the recent year. But there are still important and serious challenges. Long-term real investment is still low. Fiscal deficits is still high. And public debt, of course, is growing. And private inflows, though they picked up a bit recently, are still low compared to historic levels. and trade deficit continues to be high. And then, of course, as you know, there are other serious challenges, severe energy problems, law and order, security problems. And the growth in the global economy has been sluggish, so that is good. So I'll just very briefly show you the data. As you can see, compared to 2009, from a peak inflation rate, the inflation rate has come down, the growth rate has gone up. The balance of payment position is improved, particularly in the recent fiscal year. Capital inflows have increased substantially. And compared again to high deficit in 08, it has come down. But you can see that we can see also that the foreign exchange reserves have gone up. Some of these are from IMF program. But also there has been a dramatic increase in the exchange rate in the recent year. And here you can see even though fiscal deficit has come down a little bit in the last year, some marginal improvement, the general levels remains high. And government continues to borrow a lot from state bank and private banks. And finally, just showing the policy stance, and in the recent period, the interest rates have been increased marginally. Okay, now I'm just going to move on to the brief description and variations of the model. So I'll just mention the changes that we've introduced. I should mention that this model is really based on what's now called a new Keynesian framework, and it's widely used by central banks in many countries and international agencies. But we've then adapted it to Pakistan's economy. And two key things we've done is we've incorporated these frictions in the credit market and the exchange market. So the first thing we did was we introduced adjustment cost in the banking sector of the model, and that introduces inertia in the setting of the bank loan rate. So as policy rate changes, the bank loan rate does not respond very quickly. Second, we've also introduced high transactions cost in international capital transactions, which are a function of international borrowing of foreign debt. And so these make the effect of policy changes or intervention in the exchange market to have a weak impact on capital flows and exchange rates, which is the case in Pakistan. And then there are some other changes. We have put inertia and expectations, so they are expectation and inflation, partly forward-looking, partly backward-looking. We have two types of households. High-income households who actively interact with the banking and the financial sector, and low-income households who don't participate in the sector and are liquidity constrained, that is, spend whatever they earn. And then we assume the stickiness of wages and prices that are always an important issue in these models. And we assume, as the evidence suggests, that prices are less sticky than wages in Pakistan. Then for the monetary policy rule, now like many countries, state bank uses interest rate to implement its policy. We assume a rule in the model in which the interest rate changes systematically in response to inflation and other variables. This is consistent with, again, the evidence. We also assume that the state bank, again, as is its practice, intervenes heavily in the foreign exchange market. Now, unlike monetary authorities in many countries, state bank does not set an inflation target independently. The inflation target actually is announced by the fiscal authorities. But fiscal authorities continue to borrow from the state bank. This borrowing generates a monetary growth at a certain rate. So the inflation target they can announce or they can aim at is very much constrained by their borrowing rate. And now initially I'll assume the government does take responsibility for its debt in the sense that if debt is growing, they have some target and they will adjust taxes, even though very gradually, to aim at that target. I'll briefly mention what happens if that is not the case. Now, in the model, the transmission, how monetary policy affects the economy, the key channel is the real interest rate. And there are three effects on different components of aggregate demand. If you have a higher real interest rate, first, it increases the return on savings, so it decreases consumption, at least for the high-income household who interact. It reduces investment because it increases the borrowing cost. And finally, in the presence of some capital flows, this leads to real appreciation, which decreases the exports, increases imports. So all of these effects then decrease aggregate demand, which lowers output and inflation. So this is how monetary policy transmission takes place. Now, the key factors that can reduce the effectiveness of monetary policy, first it's the inertia and expectations. So when you say lower the nominal interest rate, then the expectations do not adjust to it quickly, so the real rate does not fall as much. Then because of the frictions in the credit market, the borrowing costs don't fall as much. And third, because of the intervention, the exchange rate doesn't change, so that channel is blocked. And to illustrate these differences between Pakistan and typical developed economy monetary policy, we compare the model for Pakistan monetary policy analysis with a model, a standard model, which does not have these particular frictions. And then I'll just now show you quickly the simulations which compare the two models. So I'll first describe the simulation. As in a typical case, one experiment they can use to see how effective monetary policy is, you ask, what's the effect of a temporary decrease in the interest rate? And in this particular simulation, we lowered the interest rate by 1% in quarter one, and then this is just done for quarter one, and then brought back to the same level. And you assume that the interest rate rule, you follow the rule in the subsequent period. Inflation target is 10%, close to average. And fiscal policy slowly adjusts taxes to stabilize debt at 60%. Now I just show you the illustrations from the simulation. And you can see, compared to the standard model, the model for Pakistan, means that the temporary impact of this policy is about half. Notice that since we're doing just the effect of a temporary decrease, the impact is essentially in the first period. Similar effect on inflation. Compared to standard model, the inflation rate doesn't go up as much, and there's a significant reduction. And then I can briefly show the effect operating through different channels. First, you can see in the standard model, the real interest rate will go down more, but it doesn't go down as much in the model for Pakistan. Then, in the standard model, as the policy rate goes down, the borrowing rate goes down. But here, in Pakistan model, because of the inertia, the spread actually increases. Then, on real exchange rate appreciation, temporary decrease in interest rate brings about a big appreciation in the first quarter. That doesn't happen again in the monetary policy model because intervention and high transaction costs are impeding that effect. Okay, so then I can just make some concluding remarks. As these illustrations show, interest rate changes have a weak effect on inflation and output gap in Pakistan, especially compared to what would be the result we would expect in developing countries. Also, our estimates of interest rate rule in Pakistan show that the inflation coefficient, that is the response of interest rate to inflation, is very weak. Now, these two things combined suggest that the inflation control in Pakistan would not be very effective because when you have different shocks which produce inflation, the monetary policy takes weak action and the effect of this action is small because of these frictions. So we've done some simulations, the model where we subject the economy to different shocks and then see what happened under the current rule, what would happen again under a stronger rule, and we find that there's room for significant room for improvement if you had more vigorous response. Now, you can't do much about the frictions, except taking some structural reforms, but given the friction, you could do a little better by responding more strongly and vigorously to inflation output. Now, finally, I want to emphasize one more point, and that is that in our analysis, we assume that monetary policy doesn't have to worry about debt. Fiscal authorities will take some action to stabilize that. Now, if they don't do that, and the evidence is not clear on whether they are really taking steps to stabilize debt, then there are serious problems. Theoretically, as has been suggested, if the government does not stabilize debt, the central bank can do it by also changing interest rate in response to that. I won't go into details about this particular policy, but we did an earlier paper where we said that yes, that could be controlled, but that kind of policy would lead to more variable inflation, more variable output, and would involve revenue losses. There could be also, in that case, credibility issues, because then the public doesn't know whether the interest rate is being increased, changed in response to debt, or changed in response to macroeconomic conditions. So our main conclusion there would be that for macroeconomic performance and stable performance, the ability of state bank can be improved considerably if there's this division that fiscal authorities make sure that debt doesn't get out of hand, and then monetary authorities can focus on implementing a policy that can keep inflation at whatever target level that is consistent with the fiscal need.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take a couple of questions before we move on to the next paper.
So in essence, are we estimating here that the leakages because of the leakages in the system in the implementation of the fiscal policy has no, basically makes the monetary policy insensitive?
Yeah, we're saying that if with the borrowing by fiscal authorities, there's two consequences. One, it means that they generate monetary growth, which means that inflation rate cannot be set independently by the central bank. It has to Second, we're saying if, in addition, they have to also adjust taxes to keep that at a stable level in the long run. And if they don't do that, they're hurt. Now, in the presentation, I focused on the effectiveness of monetary policy, and under that, I assume that the fiscal, there's no such leakage fiscal authority. Yeah.
You said that in this last presentation that there was a previous project in which you explored the policy rule where the state bank adjusts the interest rate in order to control government borrowing. Does that mean that the state bank would increase the interest rate so to prohibit borrowing, because that would increase the total borrowing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, in that simulation, what we assume is when the debt level goes up, the state bank lowers the interest rate to reduce the debt burden. That actually helps bring the debt level down. And here you can see the two conflicting goals. If, as the result of higher government expenditures, on the one hand, debt level is going up, on the other hand, you're producing some inflation. There's a conflicting problem between reaction to inflation and reaction to debt. But in that case, there is that conflict.
All this analysis which you have just done and you have presented relates only to 50% of the economy, because if we assume that 50% of the economy is undocumented, then you're only talking about half of our economy.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, this is why in our model, the standard typical model has one kind of representative household. We actually distinguish between the households which operate through the banking system, that is, they keep bank deposits, they use hold government securities, and the sector that doesn't. So we incorporated that point to see if the undocumented part represents these households with contact with interactive financial system, what effect would that make? But we found that it makes a marginal effect. The reason is that even though they don't borrow land, they spend basically what they earn. And once the other sector, consumption changes, investment changes, export changes, the changes in income do transmit the effect to this undocumented economy.
So there is underlying assumption that prices are less sticky. Okay, so if we change that or relax that assumption, how does the situation changes?
Well, the stickiness is important. If they become more sticky, then changes in monetary policy will have greater effect on output and a smaller effect on inflation, because prices now adjust more slowly.
And how much time they take for adjustment? Because normal studies go 12 months, 18 months.
Well, the average duration, in our case, we are assuming about 2 quarters for prices and more for wages. And average studies, there are more studies for other countries. For Pakistan, is based on a survey, and we use the evidence from the survey done by the research department at State Bank. And we've taken the numbers from that survey where they just ask people, how soon do you change prices? But they're not, they show more rapid adjustment in Pakistan compared to, say, US or many other countries.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. I will ask one last question, and then we can move on to the next speaker. The frictions which make monetary policy relatively less effective. Is the State Bank engaged in a discussion with the Ministry of Finance in trying to reduce some of those frictions? And what is the role of the Ministry of Finance in reducing those frictions? And what's the role of the State Bank in the way it supervises the banks in reducing those frictions?
Well, State Bank in the past has more been concerned about the debt issues. They have been engaged with the Finance Department, with actually the legislation, to provide some legislation which would actually make them more responsible effectiveness issue is a more recent one. I mean, it is something that I guess is there but has not been emphasized. And this is the result that now I think statement would undertake with in designing the rule. But here the problem is that debt issue can also perhaps was the primary reason why the response of state bank to inflation is very low, because they get a lot of these pressures. And this is something that...
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next paper is by Dr. Ali Hasnan, on leave from LUMS, currently postdoc fellow at Oxford. Paper is Bureaucrats and Personalities, Experimental Evidence from Pakistan. The two discussants, may I invite them also to come. Aizaz Akhtar, Special Monitoring Unit, Chief Minister, Secretariat, Government of Punjab, and Afzal Latif, Secretary, Elementary and School Education Department, Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Elementary and Secondary Education Department.
Thank you. So this is joint work with Mike Callan, Saad Gulzar, Yasir Khan, who's here in the audience, and Rahman Rizai. It builds on an intervention that we designed with partners in the Health Department and in the World Bank to get at the problem of absence. So we know that a major service delivery problem in the developing world is the lack of workers showing up to work in dispersed facilities such as schools, clinics, and so on. And we'll report results from a monitoring intervention that we created, and also a salience of information experiment. But just for context, these are small clinics that are manned by one doctor in most cases, and other staff. They're often very far from the administrative infrastructure of the province. And the question is, how do you get doctors to show up to work when they face weak incentives, and what are the sort of range of ways in which we can try and get leverage on this problem. So here in this paper, we ask whether the personality of the worker matters to their job performance on a few different measures that we'll discuss. So the questions that we're going to address, and just to provide an initial snapshot of it, are one, are personality measures associated with health worker performance under very weak status quo incentives. Two, do personality measures predict who will respond to changes in incentives? And so we will shock incentives with our monitoring technology, and we'll report what happens then. And finally, do personality measures predict who act on information related to their job performance? So naturally, governments are composed of people, but the main reason why we need to tackle intrinsic motivation is that in many developing country contexts, the extrinsic motivations that we can in place are weak, and we might have little leverage over them. And so taking a different route to trying to get worker performance to improve might be profitable and is worth exploring. There's evidence that personalities predict performance in the US, primarily in the private sector. And there's very sort of recent work, a very active literature that looks at sort of what are the ways in which we can draw policy benefits from understanding the personalities of job applicants to developing country jobs. And so it's also possible that some of the traits of workers are malleable over time, but sort of the literature, the key literature in which we think this paper feeds into are two papers, one by Dalbo, Finnan, and Rossi, and the other is by Nawaz Shafar, Yana Bandar, and Scott Lee. The first looks at how the profile of applicants to jobs adjust depending on the features of the position that are advertised, in particular the wages that are offered. And the second looks at how you advertise a position matters to who applies, and subsequent worker performance. And so, as I said before, the two experiments we'll talk about are the smartphone monitoring system and this experiment on information salience. I'll talk about more in a bit. And we went and measured performance on three different measures that I'll talk about today. One is doctor attendance at these clinics. The other is inspections done by the healthcare inspectors whose job it is to go to different facilities to inspect whether doctors are showing up to work. And the third is a collusion measure that we have between doctors and inspectors. So we have a large and representative sample of doctors in Punjab. We have a survey across 3 waves of about 850 basic health units, which are the clinics under study here, which is 1/3 of all basic health units in the Punjab. The universe of health inspectors in Punjab, and the universe of senior health officials in Punjab, and I'll talk more about this in a second. So just to preview findings, the personality traits positively predict doctor attendance and negatively predict doctor-inspector collusion in the status quo. So personalities can be shown to explain job performance as incentives stand, the sort of relatively weak status quo incentives that stand. Personality traits also sort of predict health inspector responses to the monitoring intervention, in which we shock their incentives to go and monitor health workers. And we find a very large 35 percentage point differential increase in inspections, given a 1 standard deviation higher health inspector Big 5 performance measure, the personality measure. And third, personality traits strongly predict which senior officials act on reports of doctor absence. So the second experiment that I'll discuss, which is about information salience, we'll show that a 1 standard deviation higher senior health official Big 5 index causes a 40 percentage point reduction in doctor absence following the creation of a facility flag. And again, this will become clear in a second. So just to preface this with a simple model, if we assume that better personality means that there is less effort required to do the same work, then as detection of shirking rises, lower personality types are moved to over the margin to start working also. Right? So an increase in monitoring will cause more people to come into to work. And so there are 2 things to take away from this. I'm not going to go into the model in much detail. But the first is that personality predicts status quo performance. And the second is that the response to a shock on incentives depends on the distribution of personality types. Okay, so one question is, can personality measures give us theta, and theta is a measure for worker type. Right? And so we're assuming here that as personality types get better in terms of a higher personality measure, that we have a rise in, we have cheaper effort, or we have a rise in how much people work. Okay, so the Monitoring Monitors program, so just to give you the summary of the institutional context, under the Health Secretary, who's the head of the province's health department, are senior health officials, 1 in each district, and a district is about 2 million people each. These are called EDOs. Under them, in each sub-district, and there are 3 or 4 in each district, are health inspectors, DDOs, whose primary job it is to go and perform facility inspections. And it's here that where we are trying to shock their incentives. So So these health inspectors are where our monitoring experiment comes in. And then finally, doctors are at the dispersed facility or the health clinic level. So what we did was the status quo was that they were taking paper-based attendance reports and filling them in and providing them, aggregating them at the provincial level. And what we did was we designed an Android-based monitoring technology. And these workers were sort of the senior health. So both the senior health officials, the EDOs, but primarily the health inspectors, the DDOs, were given these devices so that when they went for their visits to these dispersed facilities, the data that they would enter would immediately populate a website where we could see, among other things, a geotag and a timestamp, as well as a picture of so the protocol was that you had to have your picture taken in front, sort of in front of the facility with staff in attendance. And so what this did was it made it harder for them to shirk on their job. So there were anecdotes about how people could potentially be filling in forms, paper forms, sitting in their office and not actually doing the visit, but this sort of physically pushed them to go and actually perform the inspection. And then one of the features was that at the provincial level, the secretary could look at, or the head of the department could look at who was performing their job or who was going and doing these inspections. And so compared to the status quo, this was a real shock to their incentive structure. And I'll come to this in a bit. So we did this so Punjab has 36 districts. We did a pilot in Khanewal and then did a treatment in 18 and control of 17 districts. And we did a survey across 3 waves on 1/3 of all basic health facilities. So this was 3 waves, and the measures that we were trying to get from these surveys was when our third-party sort of enumerator went to the facility, they would look at whether the doctor was physically at work or not, so physical verification of attendance. And second, they would look at the register and see whether the inspector had signed his presence between this visit and the last visit, so that you could verify whether that has happened. And we've constructed a measure of collusion, and again, I'll come to that in a bit. So we also did personality measures of a subsample of doctors and all of the universe of health inspectors. And this was based on 2 basic measures. The first was the Big 5 personality index. So the Big 5 has been prevalent for the last 25, 30 years and breaks personality down into agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, extroversion, and openness. And so some example statements are, I like to be among lots of people, I don't want to waste time dreaming, I try to be polite to everyone I meet, I keep all my things clean and tidy, and we used a Big 5 that was translated and validated by Qaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. The second measure that we used was the Perry Public Service Motivation Test, which is 6 dimensions, and which are attraction to policy making, civic duty, commitment to policy making, compassion, self-sacrifice, and social justice. And the idea is that this is supposed to be a measure of a person's commitment to public service. And so, breaking our results down into 3 parts, the first question was, does personality predict status quo performance? And here so this is different regressions where we have standardized personality. So the way to read this is that a 1 standard deviation increase in any of these indicators causes that point estimate of impact on doctor attendance. So doctor attendance that is greater by 1 standard deviation causes doctor attendance to go up by about 0.44 or so if you look at the Big 5 index regression. If you look at drilling down into each one, you can look at how they relate. And so you can see that conscientiousness is significant, and then the PSM index, and within the PSM index, civic duty and self-sacrifice are significant at the 95% level. And then, so the doctor inspector, so I said I'd explain the collusion measure. The collusion measure is that if we have had reports of the doctor being absent in waves 2 and 3 of our survey, which is when the monitoring device had been switched on, if we find that in that time period, all of the administrative reports of absence, all of the administrative reports of presence are accounted for. In other words, if the administrative system, this monitoring system that we had implemented, is reporting full presence, and our survey is reporting, which is unannounced, is reporting absence on both of those waves, we see that as collusion. And so the point is that there was anecdotal evidence that a lot of times these monitoring workers will call the doctors in the facilities up earlier and let them know to be there at a given time. And so this might be a measure of collusion. And we see that so all of these personality tests are highly predictive of whether there is collusion. So the first question was, does personality predict status quo performance? And the answer was yes, this was data from our controls, and so it does look like we can predict both doctor attendance and doctor and inspector collusion by looking at the Big Five and PSM. The second question is, does personality predict responses to changes in incentives? And here, what we did was, as I said, we had geotag and timestamped reports of whether inspectors were showing up to work or not. And here we have a very large 35 percentage point impact of, so if you have personality that is one standard deviation better than average, we have a 35 percentage point increase in health inspection rates if you look at regression 2. And so basically, given the intercept, this suggests that there is basically perfect inspection for someone with a personality one standard deviation better than average. So if you go back to the model, we said that the impact of a shock to incentives will be greatest for people with personalities in the middle. And if you look at so here we have a non-parametric differential localized average treatment effects curve, and you can see that the impact of inspections is greatest for people with personalities that are close to the median. Okay, so, and the last question was, does personality predict who will act on information? And so what we've done, the second experiment was that we created a flag, an arbitrary flag. So when an inspector goes and does this visit, they're supposed to bring back information on things like the date and so on are all coded in directly, but what staff was absent importantly. And if if 3 or more facility staff were absent, we had in the back end and very discreetly turned on this flag, so you'd have that facility highlighted in red, so that when it is reported to senior health officials, so the health officials that are superior to the inspectors, this information will become salient. So this information on the dashboard is going out to the senior health officials, one per district, and it reports inspections by these people from data collected by the health inspectors, but is data about doctors. And we find that so the way to read this is, for staff absent when inspected, the absence of the doctor in our subsequent visit drops between the 2 and 3 mark, which is where the flag turns on, and nowhere else. And if you look at regression results, we find that there's a very strong impact. So flagging again, if the personality of the inspector who's observing the data is one standard deviation better, there's a 40 percentage point increase in whether the doctor at the facility is present next time. In other words, we think that this is the sort of mechanism through which this is happening is that inspectors with better personalities are maybe calling informally and sort of either punishing or giving a scolding to doctors who perhaps absent earlier, and people with sort of lower personality measures are not doing something of this sort. So just replacing some of the lower personality senior officials with higher personality senior officials could potentially mean that there's a larger monitoring impact, and by a very significant degree. And we've broken this down. So the other thing we've done is we've looked at the personalities of the health officials, and so this is just data from 17 observations, because there were just 17 senior officials that we were doing this with, but we find even there that the Big Five index is fairly explanatory. So just to conclude, we designed a smartphone monitoring system that was highly effective, but importantly, the effectiveness of the reform depended on traits, both in terms of whether the monitoring itself had an impact and in terms of whether people were paying attention to the flag. And so in terms of policy implications, we can predict what type of bureaucrats respond to reforms. But it seems also that how you present data can have a big impact on the decision-making of senior officials in ways that interact with their personalities. And finally, this is potentially a way to get at a significant service delivery problem through looking at, perhaps if you can't change incentives, looking at personality. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have a large number of civil servants in the audience, and they will have many questions. But before we do that, let me invite our two discussants to offer their reaction to the paper. Let me start with Azaz.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Ali's work is absolutely relevant to the kind of work we're doing in Punjab today. All of the monitors application, which is mentioned, was a very innovative idea, and it's now being deployed and institutionalized in the government. And part of the education reform program, previously was that we actually hired a force of people called the MEAs. So the MEAs would go into schools and record data, looking at staff presence and looking at facility information and looking at teacher presence plus students. Now we've basically done the same thing in the health reform program as well. But the health reform program basically uses the same software, which Ali has mentioned here, which was monitoring the monitors. So we're basically using the monitoring the monitors in three different ways. One is a third party outside of the health department monitors health facilities. The inspectors or their seniors, as per the graph shown here with the health secretary and the EDOs, they use the same application. At the same time, the vaccinators get tracked using the same geostamped information. So this is all very, very relevant. I'll just point to a recent activity which we basically started to do. In the last stocktake meeting with the Chief Minister, he basically said, this health system, especially the primary health care system, isn't working, do something better. So we thought about it very carefully, and we thought about making radical changes and how we bring about radical changes, and we thought about 5 things we could do differently and better. So the first one which came in our mind was strengthening of accountability. And that again relates to all of what Ali's work is. And that is very, very relevant. Within strengthening of accountability, one thing which came out in this paper as well was to actually give a clear message to the EDO, the DDO, and the underperformance in the underperforming sectors based on data being collected from the third-party validation process. So if that happens, the chances are that we'll have more. We haven't seen that evidence yet, but the research study shows that we're probably making a good decision about telling the Chief Minister that if you go about firing a bunch of videos or replace them, which the status quo does not stay because they get replaced into something else, chances are the doctors will actually come to work. The second thing we're talking about is the contracting and training and incentives, and then, of course, the devolution. In terms of incentives, there are clear incentives here in the paper as well. We've looked at four different case studies, once in Turkey, Cambodia, India, Rwanda. But it turns out to be that any time we think about incentives, every time we come across that if you want to increase incentives, you at the same time have to have the data, the audit mechanisms, and the information around incentives. Really, really important. So strengthening of the system with data is really key, which we're understanding from the failures of some of the countries, and we're learning from that. We just want to say that the health reform program is making progress based on key interventions recommended from research studies, and we have more research to be done around how we want to use incentives as part of the health reform. Those are my key points. I think the papers were written very well. It is very relevant, and I think we can take on a few more things from the paper to actually design policies which can benefit the health program in Punjab. Thank you.
Ali, as you can see, I am older and therefore more height-bound, perhaps more cynical. I think this paper was personally exciting for me as well as provocative. It was exciting because you used the word also intuitive and intuitively. It provides evidence for what, for example, I, as a civil servant, have felt. I take away three things from your presentation, and before that your paper, which I read last night. One is that personality matters. The other is that there are good people out there. And the third is that let's use them. From a policy perspective, to take your findings and make them real within the government systems, what would I have to do? I would probably have to do, and I don't know if these are the appropriate words, I would have to do psychological profiling, if I can put it like that. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to look into this, but in Pakistan, the senior civil service at the recruitment level already involves profiling through the competitive process. As they go through the competitive process, they undergo 2 days of psychological testing. So what has happened in the senior civil service with this exercise? Is it still effective? Does it operate as a filter? Do we get the right people, or whether it has ossified like so many other things in the bureaucracy? In order to operationalize this, I would have to link it to how people are, as I said, recruited, how their performance is evaluated, and therefore how they are promoted. Once again, I'm not sure because we haven't had a conversation about this. How people are evaluated would be important, and how people are evaluated currently would be important. Does the existing performance evaluation system take into account something similar to these sort of things? I mean, emotional stability, conscientiousness, maybe not the exact words, but I think some of these dimensions are supposed to be catered for in the existing performance evaluation system. I think it would be very interesting to find how that is operating, or more to the point, not operating. The point I want to make is that if I am going to take this and turn it into reality, and then fiddle with how people are recruited, how they're evaluated, and how they are promoted, then we're talking about major civil service reform. And as we all know, probably the hardest reform of all, with the biggest failure rate. So therefore, a very big challenge. I'm just wondering whether ICG in parallel needs to do work on what are referred to as weak incentives in the paper, whether new life can be breathed into old bottles, if I can put the two things together. Just bear with me. I think the chart which defines, I think we might be missing something here, in the sense, missing an opportunity here, because the chart that defines the relationship between the secretary and the EDO, it's a vertical thing. I think a fresh look at the design of government, which should probably show a more horizontal relationship between a policy-making department and an implementing directorate, an arm's length relationship, so that perhaps agency, the beginnings of agency type reforms can happen, where you have contractual obligations, but then you give the directorate more authority to be able to use those finances, target setting and things like that. In that vertical description, I think you lose that relationship, and therefore you lose the opportunity for reform if you pictorialize that relationship like that. Maybe two or three random thoughts. As I said, it was a provocative paper. The word, no, I think I've taken pretty much care of that. I think monitoring, new ways of monitoring would be interesting. Guys on motorbikes running around either with clipboards or now modern applications on modern cell phones is all very well. How about civil society, which is so critical? How about contracting civil society to carry out monitoring functions in schools and health outlets? I think that would be a very interesting innovation, and I think it would be interesting to see how performance is affected by that. I think I will stop there.
Thank you very much.
Can I have a quick comment? You have time.
30 seconds, so then I
sure.
can open it up.
You have the regression slide here. The way I take about this is that the regression slide tells policymakers to think about how they need to design their incentives and how they need to think about strengthening accountability. So I took the paper as saying as a tool, as a method which can be used, or numbers which can be used to think about interventions carefully and designing them really well. And it just gives you an insight into how to do that more than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please speak into the mic when it is brought to you so that it can be recorded.
I think that the technical contents of the paper were very good, and I think it's probably very useful. But what I want to know is that this program has been implemented about 2 years ago. What are the results of that program? Have people benefited out of it? Because the purpose was to improve the service delivery. Has that happened? Is there any research done on that bit? Because we must have spent a lot of money on this, and it's very nice to have it on the paper and look at it and see all these smartphones working. But what did the people of Punjab get out of it?
So we have a separate paper that looks in more detail at the impact of the technology, the monitoring technology. And we find that inspection rates did go up very significantly. So to the tune of, I think it was 50%.
Well, we're not talking about the inspection rate. We're talking about the improvement in service delivery to the people.
So the service delivery, right? So I was going to go on and talk about that in a second. So we found that inspection rates went up, but the effect was localized in places where sort of the political economy, if you will, was favorable. We did not find an effect on doctor attendance. And so we have arguments for why that might have happened, some of which I've talked about today, which were possible inspector-doctor collusion, but no direct impact on doctors.
It's actually a follow-on question from the other question that the gentleman asked, and it will reflect some of my cynicism as coming from the private sector on the public sector, so please excuse me for that. Because when we talk about, in a private sector, the impact, it directly is about what did it deliver to the people that it was targeted to, which are the consumers or the subjects or the citizens. And in the private sector, we are really not concerned about the attendance of our people, whether they come or what the attendance rate is less material versus what they do while they're in the office, and how much they contribute to the profit making of the company or the firm. Whereas in this case, whether they came to the private clinics or they came to the sectors and the inspection rate went up, how would we monitor whether the people living in those areas would rate the services better? And that's what is signifying the absence of accountability coming from the customers or the subjects or the citizens. And unless we focus on the end delivery, which is the benefit, I think this is great work. It's a big step forward. But that's the second problem which I have even within this, that as citizens of developing countries, we are very quick at finding new ways of collusion. And by the time the government changes the status quo, they may take 5 years, but within a year we would have found new ways of beating the system. And therefore, ultimately, you'll have to go back to what the delivery is to the subjects, which is customer satisfaction surveys about whether they are more satisfied or less satisfied about the health delivery in that tehsil or sub-district.
So two responses. One is that a health impact study was expensive, and we asked Dr. Nabi to fund it. I think he said no. The second is that you're absolutely right about how these technologies, mobile phones, can impact monitoring in very different ways. So when we were doing the treatment, I had a conversation with one of the senior health officials, and he said, I was trying to sell the idea of mobile phones as a monitoring technology. And he said it's the single worst thing that's happened to my life as an inspector, because my subordinates call up the doctors even when I'm trying to pay a surprise visit, and they'll get a call 5 minutes before I'm supposed to show up, and everyone will be there when I visit. So absolutely take your point.
So I would like to share my experience. I was in India.
You'll have to wait for the mic before you share.
I was in India visiting Bangalore, and they have introduced this service delivery concept there, and there is a hotline number, and there is an email address, and you can address this, and this will go to the highest official relating to that subject. And they said that we have done surveys, and the surveys is like 95% people are satisfied. The same evening, I took a taxi driver, and I asked him, how happy are you with the services provided? And he tells me, sir, this is all bakwas. Nothing has happened and nothing has changed.
Thank you very much, sir. Very good paper. I must appreciate that. There are a few questions which have been coming regarding actual accountability, the productivity, the effectiveness of the system. Mainly this was output-based, that you have more inspections, you have more presence in the hospitals, in the basic health units. I think the next step could be that we
measure the outcome of that, how much it has impacted the population where we have done our interventions. I mean, health standards have improved. One factor you already have, that is attendance of patients in the health facilities. That is, again, that could be one of the measures that if the attendance has increased, that means more trust on the public sector hospitals. If the private sector hospitals, they are not being established there, quacks are not there, and more people are coming to the public sector hospitals, that could be one measure to find out exactly whether people have trust on this or not. In your control group, you can find it out. And then next research could be the outcome of that, I think, whether the health indicators have improved or not in that particular area where we are actually having interventions. That's just a suggestion, I think. You may comment if you like.
So I guess, Vasil, thanks for the paper. I really liked it. Just, I guess, two questions. One is more, just sticking to this paper, I understand there's lots of interest in the health outcomes and impacts, and I think those are great questions as well. But just in the particular one you presented right now, which was more about personality, and does personality predict performance, and so should we be screening people on personality? By the way, most private sector guys do that as well. These big 5 tests are part of most employment screening in the US as well and other places. So it's very common to use these metrics that Ali was using in the private sector. I don't know if Pakistan does it, but the two questions I have before we kind of get excited about personality matters, one is empirical and the other is conceptual. The empirical question is like, let me start with the conceptual one first and I'll come to the measurement one. The conceptual problem is personality is not unidimensional. In fact, the reason we have 5 is a remark already on, it's remarkable that psychologists could agree that we have 5 dimensions. Most of the time when you look in this literature, there are actually disagreement even in those 5. But to condense them onto one metric and to be able to say this single metric is, there is such a thing as a good personality or as a bad personality is something most psychologists would not agree with. So I want to caution a bit conceptually when you say this. For instance, take extroversion or conscientiousness. These are very different dimensions. And so I think what would be nice is, and maybe you can do this in your further work, is to split these things up. In some things you actually want someone who's not extroverted. In other things you want someone, so it's not that there is necessarily a single dimension in these things. I think that's something, a nuance which would be good to play up in your work. The second one which worries me is the measurement question, given the first one. All your personality traits are going in the same direction. That's very surprising. It's surprising because of the reason I just said, which is these measure very different attributes, right? My worry is that these are picking up not personality, but when you do self-reported personality, these are picking up ability. So imagine in a real context, I'm testing people. You know you're being tested. You know you're being observed. A smart guy, let's take a question like public sector motivation. Which guy will say, I'm actually not publicly motivated? So when you do self-reported personality measurement, you have really big problems of, I mean, I've done this for several years now, of gaming the test, if you will. And so if I have an alternative explanation, if I wanted to be a bit harsh on the paper, I'd say an alternative explanation is this is all just ability, or figuring out what you're trying to ask. And if it's that, that is a single dimension. And then that dimension would also predict performance, would go exactly in the same way. And I think before we get excited about using these as screeners, that's a huge change to make, as a gentleman from KPK said. If you're going to incorporate these in selection of civil servants, you've got to be damn well sure that this measure is not subject to gaming. I don't think you've quite done that today, but I'm excited to see that there are ways to do it, and I'd encourage you to think along those lines as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, those are both extremely valid points. On the matter of context matters, and you want to understand which personality trait matters to a job, that's clearly something that. So whenever we think about how, what are the policy implications of this work, you're going to have to map out for each job exactly. Extroversion doesn't matter for some things. And other traits will not matter depending on what you're doing. So we have been very crude in the fact that we've condensed all of this into good and bad personality. We don't mean to imply it literally, and I think in the next rewrite, hopefully we'll take that into account. Certainly in future work, both mapping out what type of personality do you need for what type of job,
and B, this question of gaming is important. So clearly with PSM, the questions are very obvious, and you're absolutely right. It might be that they're trying to game the system. With Big Five, it's much, we can be much more confident, I think, about Big Five because so several studies show that it remains stable over time, and the sort of how you would tease back from an individual question to the index is slightly harder, in the very least. But again, open question, and for future research is exactly how do people game and when do people game, try to game it. So just to respond to this idea of all of our measures going in one direction, we have reports, sort of results that we didn't report today about inspector interaction with personality, and there we've got a much more mixed bag result. So hopefully that can sort of answer some of that question. But both are absolutely valid points, and we'll look into that when we do the rewrite.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I think let me just take 30 seconds just to take stock of where we are. I think there were some questions about is this really making any difference? Is this really making any difference to the citizens who use the service? I think what this research is trying to do is to first identify what kinds of interventions would it take to get that result. Getting that result is the next step, and he's quite right. I mean, I had said, first you convince us that the interventions that you're designing make sense, and then the second step will be to fund a study that actually shows how those would be implemented. And that's when some of the questions that were raised by discussants come into play, especially Secretary of Education KB, on how do you use local government systems, citizen representation to make sure that you actually implement the incentives to improve the services. So it's a two-step thing. Asan, we have you.
Oh, I thought we have Teresa.
Huh?
Happy.
No, Teresa is the fourth paper. So we have you, and we have discussants. Mr. Tarar, please come. And Tashfeen Saab.
So thank you again. This is going to be a slightly different from the other papers. The other papers are all really nice, well done and finished pieces. This is very much work in progress. We're just beginning to start this. We've been here. We're halfway through the project, and so what we thought we'd highlight in this one is less the results and more the process through which we've come about doing what we're doing. And I thought it'd be really nice for the discussants to talk a bit about, for the DG, since he's actually doing this currently, in fact, literally last week and this week, and when he goes back, talk a bit about the challenges in this kind of work. He's facing a lot of pressure, as you'll see in some of the things we're doing right now, and I'd love to hear from him and kind of share with the audience how he's dealing with that and what the challenges are. And from the sort of input of every person, I'd love to get a sense of more broadly advice you would have on how we would take this forward. This is very much, we're halfway through the design in the first year, but the other year is still left, so it'd be a great chance to get feedback. We can actually do something about it. So, and I thought this would be a nice respite from sort of this is much easier. I don't have a lot of graphs and results to present, so it'll be hopefully less taxing. No pun intended, I guess. Okay, and this is joint work with Adnan and Ben. Adnan is hiding somewhere. There he is. And Ben, and again, I wanted to acknowledge in collaboration with the Excise and Taxation Department, and the DG is representing that department here today. So for those of you who are in the tax and development session, I actually presented some highlights from a project which has been completed. It went on for about 2 years fully in its full form, and maybe a year before that in a pilot form. So in 3 years, and Ijaz sort of alluded to this as well, it takes time, but eventually we do get the final outcomes. So in this case, let me just to remind people and refresh. And the reason I'm doing this is more to give you a sense of, with time, what can we achieve. So in this project, for those of you who are there in the session, I apologize. For the others, let me just give you a brief refresher. What we done was, this was our first engagement which started with the property tax department. And at that point, to be honest, we actually wanted to do what I'm going to present in the next slide, but it was too challenging. The honest answer is we wanted to do transfers and postings because it was very clear when you talk to inspectors and civil servants that one of the biggest dimensions of influence for them and things they really care about is where they're posted. And for all of you who are civil servants, this doesn't come as a surprise. So our first instinct was, could we do something with this? And the quick answer to that in about 5 seconds was absolutely not, because we aren't ready for this. This is highly contentious. And I think it was a fair comment as well, because we as researchers didn't have the context or the knowledge, or frankly the trust from our policy counterparts to be able to pull something like that off. So the project I'm presenting is in some sense 4 years in the making. The first 4 was another project which we hoped was somewhat easier to do, in the sense that everyone got money, and so the only people who were unhappy with us were the finance department people. Everyone else kind of liked us. But that laid the foundation of what came next. And so this is also an indication that sometimes when you start working with the department, just incrementally building these relationships over time can lead to more and more ambitious things. So Ali was being very, very modest when he said, look, I needed more money. But to get at health outcomes for the thing he presented is incredibly difficult. It's doable, but the amount of surveys you would need to do to look at population impacts on these things is non-trivial. But it can happen if you have health department which shares demographic and health data, or the DHS records. So it requires a lot of collaboration, and I'm hoping in the kind of work Ali and his co-authors are doing that those agendas are becoming more and more feasible. So I want to just have a word of patience for us. I understand we're really small things, but there is a grander picture over here that I think is all adding up to. And so just to go back to this particular project, so all we did in this project was we were trying to test whether, with the same personality, so Ali's already showing great work which says that people's personalities matter, but we said, look, we can't select new people right now. So given the people we have, and we were working with tax staff, and for those of you who are not in taxation, tax officials are probably the most disliked people. The only people who like tax guys are tax guys themselves. And even they sometimes don't, because their family members are unhappy with them. So these are not likable people, unfortunately. So we got a lot of criticism saying, these guys are never going to, you're working with these guys? They can never do anything. And so for me, apart from the effect that this project had a positive ROI in an investment sense, the nice thing was that we could demonstrate that with the same people you have, you can actually make improvements. I once had a colleague say this in a facetious way to me, to say, the problem with Pakistan is Pakistanis, in the sense that you create a new population of people and you get great work going. I don't obviously agree with that. I actually think the problem is design and institutions and fixing them. So if you give people the opportunity to do well, I think they react to it. And I think that's the work that a lot of us are highlighting here. So what happened in this project is we gave tax officials, tax inspectors, so these are the lowest level tax officials in a country, in the tax department, basically performance-based. So if you raised more money than you typically had raised in your tax circle, you would be given an extra bonus. And the four bars you see, the first 3 bars are just different ways of rewarding people. In the first bar, those are people who only got rewarded on money collected. In the second and third bar, we try to be a bit more nuanced and say the government just doesn't care about money collected, the government wants to also have a good tax system. So we rewarded inspectors on good service as well, not just, so I think Faisal, in the language you were talking about, customer satisfaction. So we measured it through surveys. We luckily had a slightly larger budget, so we were able to do those surveys. They're hard to do, and they're also not great, because people are funny in how they report happiness. Right? Happiness is a very odd thing in lots of ways. But we tried doing that. In the third one, we made it even more flexible. We had supervisors give feedback. But what you see, and the last bar is basically business as usual. Now, business as usual is not bad, by the way. If you did this graph for education, it would look much, much worse. I should acknowledge the tax department cares a lot about performance, partly because it has a very obvious indicator. I mean, if you've ever gone to the tax department in the month of June, I suggest not doing so, because it's insanely busy. I've seen this with the Secretary and the DG and others, which is every day you're getting text messages from your directors about how much money was collected, every day, because it's the end of the fiscal year and there's a lot of pressure. So it's not a place where there isn't pressure for performance. So even in the comparison group, which is in 2 years, you can see there's been quite good performance. The government has been able to raise more taxes even in 2 years. But the interesting thing is what these additional schemes can do on top of that. And if you look at the first bar, that's almost twice the height of the second one, of the last one. So that's saying that whatever success we're able to do, we can almost double that success by rewarding people for what they're doing. And that's sort of very encouraging for us. What's also very encouraging for us is in a pure return on investment sense. Like I feel like when you ask the government to spend money, government money is very precious, right? It's raised by taxing people. When you tax people, you create a deadweight loss. And we have macroeconomists who can tell us all about the costs of doing so. But the nice thing is that this project had a return on the order of 30 to 50%. So that means if you put in $1, you got $1.50. Or in this case, you put in 100 million and you got 150 to 200 million back. And so that's a decent trade-off. We actually think that's a bit of an underestimate in the sense that, in fact, if you ask me what the optimal scheme over here is going to be, it's not like incentives every year. I would argue we have incentive, just like you have tax holiday years, you should have like tax incentive years, where every few years you give huge incentives for staff to work hard, because once they bring in people into the tax base, they're in the tax base now. So you can benefit that in years to come. In this project, we did it for 2 years continuously. But in any case, this suggested that incentives make a difference. Now, this, as I said, has now set the stage for us to do a somewhat even more ambitious version of this. And I remember when we first started this project, the then actually Chairman P&D at that time, Javed Aslam Saab, who then became Chief Secretary, was very keen on doing this project. Now, this is now saying, take exactly what we did in performance pay, except instead of paying people based on money, pay them based on their location, their choice, the ability to choose. Now, this is not easy to do, right? Because there's a lot of contention in where you're posted and transfers. And we were trying to come up over time, so what's the objective of here? We're trying to come up with what we would say is optimal HR policy. Optimal human resource policy is both about rewarding people financially, but also rewarding them non-financially. It's not just always about money. And people have very strong preferences on where they're posted, not just because, for the reasons you might think that they want to be lazy or it's corruption or something. You live close to a place. You have idiosyncratic preferences. You want to be next to an area because you feel like you'll be better working in that area. So there's lots of reasons people have preferences which aren't necessarily perverse. But we can take advantage of that. We can give them the opportunity to choose if they perform. So that was the idea. Now, there's a question of when you think of rewarding people for things without using money, how would you do that, right? And I want to illustrate that, look, we as researchers don't come up with, I can't look at Murley's 1971 and figure this out, right? I don't have a research paper which does that for me. The only way I can do it is by talking to policymakers. I can get a sense of saying, what's feasible in this context? What can you do? So all of these, in some sense, are feasible, theoretically, right? You could do promotions. A lot of what the private sector does is we often reward people on very steep performance incentives by basically promoting people. If you really succeed well, you're the young guy who comes in and Faisal's firm, someone joins. If you're a young kind of dynamo, very quickly in a few years, there won't be seniority. Quickly in a few years, you'll be at the top. You'll be heading your group. Right? So there's a very steep incentives in that sense. The problem in our context was there were limited opportunities. There simply weren't enough slots, senior slots. There's inspectors and tax staff, but after them, the next guys, there's a very tight, narrow pyramid. And those guys are not retiring, so who do you replace, right? So this was very hard for us to do, even though it's part of optimal policy. There's social recognition, which is you recognize people, you acknowledge them for their effort. This has huge value in certain sectors, like in education. It can have huge values, right, which is an inherently social sector. The issue with us for this was that, first of all, tax collectors aren't the most cuddly teddy bear type, so it wasn't obvious that social recognition was going to go really far. And secondly, there was concerns about cynicism. That fine, you recognize me once, but 6 months later, I'm tired of this recognition, so what? It's not going to feed my kids, right? And so there's a cynicism about that. And then there's also, like I said earlier, there's lots of, look, for any of you who work in public service, you know there's lots of non-monetizable, non-monetary benefits you can give, right? Who gets access to the motorcycle, if there is one? There's lots of little things you can do to help people around. Those are powerful, but they were very hard for us to work with because they're not systematically either designed or determined. So it was very difficult for us to kind of figure out how we could allocate these little goodies. All departments have goodies, and you know, there's goodies you can allocate, and hopefully most of you do it in a way that you reward the best in your department. But you have some power to do that. So for us, when we thought about all of and each one of these things was a discussion. It wasn't just we sitting here deciding. It was a question of working with the department and saying what's feasible over here. And what became very clear is transfers and postings was the obvious one. It was the obvious candidate in this context for several reasons. One, there was lots of room over here. It's not that people don't move. Right? This happens constantly. Like the typical tenure, I think the DJ would know better, but I'd say the typical tenure of a tax staff or tax collector in a given area is about 2 years, 2 to 3. So in 2 to 3 years, so imagine 500 people every 2 to 3 years they're shifting around. So there's lots of movement. So the nice thing was we were proposing something which actually was happening. Movement was happening. Imagine a world where people weren't being moved around and suddenly you create a policy of moving people around. You can imagine all the pressure you create. Moving is not easy, right? So we didn't think we were going to increase movements. We were just going to change the way movements were occurring. The second thing is, why is there so many movements? Tax circles are very, very different. So, and this is another interesting, there's a separate paper one can write on it, which is why is that the case? So in each tax circle, which is a collection area, a geographical area, there are only a team of 3 people, local, an inspector, a constable, and a clerk, who are supposed to be handling that area. Now you'd think there are only 3 humans. The tax circles should all be the same size. Actually, they're not. Forget location. It's not just, there are some circles which are nice. Everyone wants to be in a nice urban development, rich people, Gulberg, Mall Road. These are things which the people from Lahore or Pakistan would know. So just nicer localities. I don't know, London all seems to be equally as nice and yucky at the same time. So I don't know what localities are over here. But they are very different. In fact, the largest tax circle is 50 times the size of the smallest tax circle. Now, part of this is historical reasons. Places grow, and it's hard to collect data and to change things in time. But this means that there's huge preferences. You're choosing over apples, which are very different apples, right? Some are much bigger apples than other apples, and sometimes apples of different flavors. And so this made it clear that people cared about this a lot. And when you ask tax staff, so one of the most fun things we did was we had every single tax department official, about 500 of them, take circles and rank them. Where would you want to be? And that's a fascinating, just analyze, forget this study, just analyzing that data is fascinating. Because it suggests, first of all, there is such a thing as favorite circles. That everyone wants the model towns of the world. But there is lots of idiosyncratic preferences as well. It's not that everyone wants model town. A lot of people have different reasons for choosing different things. And if I wanted to be nice, I could say, well, maybe people are optimally, in the word that Ali was saying, maybe personalities, like if you're a tough personality, maybe you like being in a tough circle. I don't know what a tough circle is, but McClure Road. I don't know if it's a tough circle, but I'd imagine, knowing my own people, the big Kashmiri population there, they tend to be argumentative at times. So you could imagine that people are optimally choosing. Someone is saying, I work better in this circle. Another person works better in a different circle. And you could allow for that movement to happen. So for these reasons, we thought this was an interesting way to begin. Right? That it was possible. We could try doing it. There was support for it. But having said that, there was theoretical reasons to do it. This seemed like the right thing to do. But it's extremely, extremely hard. And I wanted to share some ideas, and I'm hoping the DJ will tell you much more, because, like I said, the design challenge was the part we pushed a lot more on. And to be honest, that was the easier part. Even that's hard. But you can think of the design challenge. First is, how do you measure performance? That's non-trivial. Taxation is nicer in certain ways. You can do it, but still it's a non-trivial problem. And you have to be really worried. Remember, a scheme can only work if people believe in it. I remember the first meeting I ever had, the first tough meeting I ever had in the tax department was, I think, a year into the project when the union, the tax inspectors union guys came along. And they wanted an explanation of what we were doing. And I thought it was very fair. They said, look, how did you choose these criteria? what's the basis of these criteria? And I felt, I think I bored them to death because I gave them a 2-hour lecture. It must have succeeded because they didn't revolt. Either they just got tired and said, this guy's so boring that he probably isn't biased, or maybe I had some measure that I got through. But
maybe they thought, this guy doesn't get it at all.
Or maybe thought, there's no point. But they didn't resist then. The nice thing was they actually, the main union leader, who's now an assistant inspector, became quite friendly afterwards. He was very upset in the beginning. But one of the things I think was, and I don't want to underestimate this, which is you don't have mechanisms work unless the people who those mechanisms are applied to, or the schemes are applied to, understand them but believe them, and believe that they're credible. And this is the big deal. And so you have to justify, you can't just come up with theoretical mechanisms and prove them. You have to explain and justify that they can actually be feasible. The second thing is, whenever you do these, one of the challenges in a transfers and posting scheme is, which was very easy in the incentive scheme. And in the incentive scheme, everyone's a winner. As long as you bring in money, you get money. Those are called non-zero-sum games, right? You all can raise the size of the pie, and everyone can enjoy it. This scheme is inherently zero-sum. What that means is someone who performs well will take someone else's position who is not performing well. So by definition, when you reward someone, you're simultaneously penalizing someone. These are tournament systems. You're running competitions. So this is non-trivial to do, right? Because you're creating resentment as much as you're creating happiness. Right? It turns out actually we ended up creating more happiness or resentment. I'll tell you in a second why. And when you do this, you have to say, well, how do I create groups? When you talk about tournaments, who do I compare you with? And it's a non-trivial issue, because if you make the comparison group really large, that's nice, because that means that a small noise is taken out, right? Maybe we have 3 IGC RAs, one of who is sleeping on the side. Nudge her so she wakes up. But imagine I'm trying to compare their performance. It's a very small group, so she was staying up all night, so maybe that's why she was not attentive, and that would be unfair for me to rank her performance on, right? But the group is small. If I make the group large, it makes comparisons easier. But the larger you make the group, the less feasible it gets, because then I'm saying that one person from this group can displace another person. Now, if you increase a group, you can have groups spread over cities, groups spread over provinces, districts. So it's going to be it's a huge hardship if the guy from, I don't know, DG Khan, to pick on a favorite district of mine, Adnan comes from it, and we keep arguing back and forth between the Gujranwala and DG Khan, and I obviously think Gujranwala is better. So imagine trying to switch someone from DG Khan into Lahore or vice versa. It's going to create huge hardship on people. Families have to be uprooted. So you have to have a system which has a group be feasible. So all these are non-trivial. I'm harping on these details, and you're like, why are you telling me this? This is kind of boring. Well, if you're a tax guy, it's not boring. But even if you're not a tax guy, what I'm trying to emphasize is that sometimes the design gets lost because you miss some little detail like that. These are non-trivial details. I mean, Ali was nice enough, and others, not to show you these details, but there's lots of little tweaks which go on along this process, and any one of them can trip the whole program up, or the whole project up. And so I want to make sure that one recognizes this. But this was easy, by the way. Everything I just said was the easier part. The hardest part is the administrative and political backlash, right? Because transfers are often based either on administrative considerations, and often they're politically highly sensitive. I'd encourage you to show up in the tax or any department in the month of July or August and see what's happening. There's lots of requests about moving people around, often through political individuals, right? So these are contentious things, and so this is the pressure that I'm hoping the DG. Finance is trivial. This is the first time the finance department actually, after the last project, they didn't like us. This project they really loved us because it costs you nothing. Remember, it's a tournament. You don't have to pay anyone anything. So the ROI in this thing is insane in that sense. You're dividing a hopefully positive number by 0. And the last time I checked on math, when you divide a positive number by 0, you get infinity. I'm being a bit facetious. There is a cost to this. There's an administrative and logistical cost to doing this. But there isn't a financial outlay to this. And so just very quickly, I'll end very soon. So how did we do this? How do we resolve these things? We simply made groups of 10 circles to make it logistically feasible. The 10 circles were in roughly the same area. So these are 10 individuals who are being compared to each other. Why 10? I don't know, base decimal, 10 fingers. It could have been 7, it could have been 11, it could have been 13, doesn't really matter. But it was definitely important to not have it be 3 and not have it be 50. Okay? So 10 circles. And then we said by the end of the year, we will have you compete. We will look at your performance, you 10. And we will be a bit fair. We'll try to take into account it's not your level performance, it's your percentage increase year on year. So there's some adjustment for some people are in bigger circles, some people are smaller circles. What we're asking is how much percentage increase did you bring? And if you're the top guy, if you brought in the most increase, you get to pick this next year. So the first year you work hard. At the end of the first year, based on how well you did, if you're number 1, you look at that list of 10 circles and you pick which one we want to go to. It's called a serial dictatorship in economics, this model. First guy gets to pick first. Once you've picked, second guy gets to pick, and so on and so forth. And to do this, we need to know your preferences over all 10 circles. So we got that. And that's what we implemented. And again, look, none of this is, when you try doing this the first time, in fact, I presented this idea a couple of years ago, and someone from the audience at that time, who were colleagues of our other bureaucrats, said, you're never going to be able to do this, guys. So what we did first is, in July of 2013, which is last year, we took just 2 groups of 10, and we just did it. We implemented it. There's no theoretical reason to do it. This was not a statistical design. The sample is too small. It was simply to try and establish credibility, which is extremely important. So we managed to transfer people, stick with those transfers the entire course of the year. So that established some credibility. And now the real fun has started, fun in inverted commas. So this year what we've done is, in the beginning, last July, we selected 150 tax circles, 15 groups of 10 people each. We gave them into 2 groups. One group was being ranked on how much money you collect. The other group was being ranked on what your increase in tax base is, which is different. You could be raising the tax base, but not recovering against it, but that's a big deal as well. And so these 150 individuals and this is where the DG is currently mired and has been brilliant, absolutely brilliant in this, which is this July, the deal was we would transfer 150 people now. This is a third of your tax department, in case you don't know these numbers. This is a non-trivial amount to do, right? A third of these people now are going to be put in this scheme and have a right to choose. Okay? It so happens not everyone wants to move, by the way. And by the way, that's a non-trivial reason as well. Having job security is a big deal as well. Sometimes people work really hard, not because they wanted to move, but because they didn't want to move. Remember, the world is a world where movements are happening. So that's a big incentive as well. So it turns out, of these 150, we actually have 60 movements actually happening. I think you issued literally 70 transfer orders were made. Of those, I must congratulate the department to say the vast majority have not only been made, but have actually happened. The individuals have taken charge. The few cases left are cases where they're data questions, which are valid questions, and we're debating those questions. There's questions about my data wasn't right, and let me improve it, and my ranking will change. So I really wanted to thank the director for this, to say that you should, like I said, ask him how he's managed to do this. And what we're now doing is, so this is halfway through the project, right? And we're going to have some preliminary results of what's happening. And this year what we're beginning to do is, we're adding more to make the sample larger. This is exactly what we did with the project, the performance pay project. And what I think is really exciting is, and this is something which is literally work in progress, and if you have thoughts on it, please catch me afterwards. One of the views on allocation of civil servants is, one view is to let people choose where they are. The other view is you as a policymaker, as a senior official, may actually have a sense of who's good where. So this is called a central allocation scheme. So what we're doing is this year we're allowing, the department is coming up, and we're helping with that, ways to think about how, if you know who's best, if I knew in my group of people who's the best in recovering money, where would you put them? Would you put them in the largest circle? Would you put them in the fastest growing circle? Would you put them with the circle of highest potential? So we're going to test this additional allocation mechanism out as well, and we're going to compare them with a world where you give people choice. So this is now answering, and I'll end over here, what we're hoping is by the end of this project, which will take another year and a half or so, and I'm hoping you'll bear with us and see the results of it, First, we're saying, can merit-based transfers and promotions be an effective and feasible way to incentivize people? Can we do that? Can we accomplish it? Can it work? And the second question we're asking is, how best can you allocate your staff? These are two, I think, first-order questions in civil service, and we're hoping with the department's help that we'll be able to answer these. So I just wanted to end with that, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Before I invite the discussants to say something, I just want to clarify. You know, I mean, in a sense, this conference, the Growth Week, is it brings in two kinds of people. There are the surgeons who come to listen to other surgeons about specific surgeries and the technical details of that surgery, etc. And a lot of what you hear is in that mode. And then we have civil servants who come to attend and say, what the hell is this? Why should I be interested in listening to all of this? So I urge you to be a little patient when you listen through these presentations, because they get very technical, because the researchers here are inviting comments from very technical people in order to make sure that what they're doing is on the right lines. So, but the objective is improving service delivery and getting at what the factors are that allow us to get better service delivery. And therefore, you know, the personality traits, instruments of monitoring, and in this case, using inbuilt incentives in the design of the civil service in order to have better service delivery, in this case, improved tax collection. Okay, I just wanted to give that little preamble. DG Sir.
So, thank you very much. I am thankful to the organizers who invited me in this conference. I am also very pleased to talk about a unique collaboration between Government of the Punjab and international researchers who engaged themselves on a civil service reform project in property tax, which Dr. Asam Khaja has recently very professionally explained. And I think he has left no room to explain it further. This collaboration between the civil service and the international researchers was a very unique and historically unprecedented one. And the idea was that together we could use the complementary qualities between us to systematically address shortcomings in civil service human resource policies. The researchers, in collaboration with the Excise and Taxation Department, designed and implemented a project to look into various incentive schemes to enhance workers' motivation that offered monetary and non-monetary rewards. As Dr. Asim Khaja has explained, the focus of the project was limited to the urban immovable property tax collections. And in Excise Department, we identify and collect a number of taxes like excise tax, motor vehicle tax, and property tax. The basis of property tax starts from the level of a circle, as Dr. Khaja has said that, and this circle consists of administratively over 3 people. One is clerk, and one is constable, and it is headed by an inspector. And the size of the circles varies from a smaller one to the biggest one. The objective of this initiative, the project, was to identify most effective policy for increasing revenue collection and higher customer satisfaction. This was not a small task and required serious effort from the Government of the Punjab as well as serious effort by the researchers. Over the course of 3 years, the performance-based scheme, which was initially introduced in the department, proved to be a success and produced a major case study and a credible reform agenda for Government of the Punjab. However, Government of the Punjab and the researchers noticed that any successful HR performance system must cover both monetary and non-monetary factors. In the context of civil service reforms, the most important non-monetary factor is related to decision regarding transfer and placement of one's position. Yet, as it has already been discussed, the transfers are made in ephemeral way, they are not made transparent, there is no basis for any transfer. We pick and choose in most of the cases, either on the whims of the politicians or some seniors or some other influence group, and objectively don't place the majority of the cases, this lower subordinate staffs. However, this collaboration has provided a great opportunity for learning how effective such a system can be in a scientific manner. We have found that working with quality researchers increases the credibility of reforms and also provides empirical basis to formulate public policy reforms. In the light of the findings of the project, a new merit-based posting transfers scheme was proposed, and as Dr. Asim Khaja has just explained, we have transferred 70 inspectors on the basis of the research which team of Dr. Asim Khaja and Adnan Kader provided to us. Since these transfers were based on the empirical basis, so it was not much difficult for us to defend those transfers. But the task was very difficult, and I had to face the brunt of you can say the angry friends, angry relatives, uneasy seniors, and angry politicians. But the answer was very simple, that since it was a policy decision, and I just appreciate the researchers that they had designed a very beautiful system. Whenever they were designing this process, they had got the approval of the chief executive of the province, that is the chief minister. So explicitly approval of the chief minister was there. Whenever any pressure came, I just told the people that it can't be done. I will have to go to the chief minister for seeking any approval or reversal of the policy. So this was the biggest strength for me and for the department. And second hindrance could have been the administrative one. Since the researchers had been engaged from the day one with the administration of the department, and they had designed the project in collaboration with the administration, so a sort of ownership had developed in the department. Although I had joined the department just two months ago, and Mr. Adnan Kader came to me and he explained the project, so I was more than willing to implement the policies which were going on and own the project. So it was basically the ownership at the administrative level which made this progress, which made this project a success one. And third and the last point was the person who was being transferred. Since he was also involved in the whole process of the design, during the design stage and the implementation stage, but when transfers took place, they were the biggest sufferers of the project, of the outcome of the project. So they started pressurizing me and my administration that this was wrong, this was not just, this was wrongly done. So we provided them the basis on which the researchers have provided us the data that this was the basis on which we have transferred the people. And secondly, sir, we convinced them that you come under the principle of estoppel, that you can't go back which you have already accepted, your tacit consent was there. So this was how we managed these transfer postings, and I'm thankful to the researchers that they are continuously engaged with us. They listen to us whenever we go back to them for any data to contest those pressures. They provide us with the sound footings. So I hope that this project will continue for at least for more another 2-3 years to yield best results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't have much to say because I'm my board is very different. It's an independent board which doesn't come under the civil services rules. So we managed to get that out from the cadre services rule, and we have formulated our own HR policies. Our HR policies are like any other corporate organization, and our salaries are again market-based, competitive salaries. Our bonuses can go up to 36 months of salaries for individuals. So, this is very different. But I think very important is the independence of the department. See, because we are independent, although we are 100% government of Sindh department, but our reporting is only to the Chief Minister. Our policies are made because we have the protection of our own act, the Sindh Revenue Board Act. The problem comes when we talk about the tenure of people, okay, especially like in case of Sindh Revenue Board, the members and the chairman are appointed by the government of Sindh. Now, as we were talking about personalities and people and their importance or consistency, bringing consistency into the policy matters, the tenure is not fixed. So in the last 4 years, this is the third chairman sitting in front of you. We don't know when will be the next chairman coming in. But as far as the board itself is concerned, the employees of the board, they have no tenure, they're permanent employees of the board, and they get market-based salaries. I think one important factor which we forgot in all of this is this, that as one of the delegates, and the Bangladeshi delegate in your other session said, that there is interference of courts. See, as far as we are concerned, we don't have any interference from the government department. We do get phone calls on appointments and, bonuses and all that. But the problem, and we can manage that, the problem comes from the courts. Now, courts have started interfering in the matters of hiring, firing, probable hiring as well. And that's something which we need to handle. Although on my, I did meet the Chief Justice of my province, and I told him, sir, at least don't interfere in our operational matters. And he promised me that the courts will not. But I still see that there are a lot of operational matters which go to them, and notices are served, and a lot of money is being spent because we have money. This money is all wasted because eventually they will lose. So I think that's very important. I think we also have to understand that times have changed. We have to treat our taxpayers as our client, because these are the people who are paying our salaries. And once we change that concept of treating them, then everything will come in place and we will not have these issues. Anybody who's visiting Karachi is most welcome to come and see Sindh Revenue Board. It's a different organization. Thank you.
Okay, I really need to press on because it's 5:30. We have 15 minutes of official time left, and we have a very interesting paper on moving to the theme of firm capability. May I invite Rocco? Are you going to do it, Chris? Or Teresa? Okay. So Teresa, please come. And the two discussants, Rukhsana Shah, she's Secretary Ministry of Textile Industry in Pakistan, and Mr. Irfan Lahi, Chairman, Planning and Development Board, Punjab.
Should I go ahead and start?
Please.
Okay. I'm Teresa Chaudhry, actually. My maiden name is listed there. I'm from the Lahore School of Economics, and I'd like to thank the IGC for bringing me here to talk about this project. This is joint work with Rocco Machiavello and with Chris Woodruff at Warwick. And on the Lahore School side, there's myself, Azam Chaudhry, and then Mavish Farhan. Actually, there's a deeper collaboration, if I might tell you about with this project. In terms of Ms. Mavish, who was our RA on the project, an excellent RA so far. She was also trained both by the Lahore School for her undergraduate and at Warwick for her master's degree. So this collaboration is on several levels. So in terms of the motivation for the paper, well, basically, this is a project which is a pilot project, and it's still in its early stages. We don't have any results to talk about yet. We're just pretty much at the, we've completed the data collection side of the project so far. But what's going on here is that we're building on work that Chris and Rocco have been doing for the last few years in Bangladesh in the ready-made garment sector. And they plan to expand this work to several countries, and Pakistan is the first country after Bangladesh to make some progress. So in terms of working in this sector, the ready-made garment sector, it's an important sector for countries in the industrial development process. It sort of comes, building the capabilities in this sector sort of comes before, building capabilities and, building, machinery and equipment and those kinds of industries. So it's an important step in that process. So far, China is the biggest player here, and but there's been increases in wages in China and also in Turkey, which is opening up opportunities for lower wage countries, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, and also Myanmar, Ethiopia, potentially to take some of that capacity. So just in terms of the policy environment. There are some exciting opportunities going on because Pakistan in December was granted GSP Plus status by the EU, which is giving it greater access to EU markets. And so, there's a question about whether Pakistan can capitalize on these opportunities. Is it going to use up this quota on the lower value added textile kind of products like bed linens and towels, or is it going to really capitalize on this opportunity to build up the ready-made garment sector? The government of Punjab is supporting the ready-made garment sector in other ways as well. There's an apparel city which is being developed outside of Lahore. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. So just sort of building on that, this is a graph which was, we had gotten this actually from a presentation by Technopack, an Indian consulting firm. And they've just put together some good figures on the labor costs. And as we can see, Turkey and China, the labor cost is increasing, whereas in Bangladesh and Pakistan, the labor costs are still relatively low. So it makes them attractive production centers. So what do we plan to achieve here? What we want to do is we want to do a benchmarking of productivity. That's sort of the first step of the process. Chris and Rocco have made a lot of progress on this work in Bangladesh, and we're just getting it started in Pakistan. And then the second part of the pilot, which we are still still working on is a pilot intervention with the factories. So based on some of our discussions and our visits to several factories, some of the issues that seem to be popping up are issues with on the quality side, addressing issues and defects, and sort of lack of information flows regarding defects. There's a lot of reworking that has to be done. Some of that, at least in terms of the popular perception, is that there's a lot of reworking that has to be done because of the piece rate system rather than fixed wage system, which is paid to the workers. It seems like a lot of defects happen, and these defects kind of build up. There aren't very good information flows, and then only after a significant amount of defects have accumulated are these issues addressed. So we're thinking about a kind of intervention that would help firms to improve these information flows and try to address these defect issues much earlier in the process. So what we've done so far is that we've collected production data over a 3-month period from a small sample of 7 factories. This is just a pilot to understand the data structures, the quality of the data, and what we can really do with it. So we're trying to focus on large firms at this point because they have the largest number of lines. That's going to be easier to work with in terms of an intervention if we try to do one. And then also, of course, the quality of the data is a lot better in the larger factories. Even in the medium-sized factories, the data issues start to crop up pretty quickly. So just sort of an overview of the data. We have data on these factories. We have information, on what kind of production system they have, how it's organized, the quality of the data, the kinds of products that they produce, the information on the different kinds of styles, and the buyers, and all those sorts of things. So what we intend to do with this data is that we plan to do a benchmarking exercise within factories and across factories and be able to return a data report or project tool to the factories. I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. In addition, what we're working on is a supervisor survey. We're looking at the line production supervisors and the quality supervisors. So we're just sort of finalizing the questionnaire for the survey and piloting it, and then we're going to be going into the factories and getting more detailed information about the efficiency issues, about quality issues, how information flows are between the supervisors and the workers, between the supervisors and the upper management, between the supervisors and the industrial engineering departments, how all of that works. So as you can see here, one of the big differences between the ready-made garment sector in Pakistan and Bangladesh is that in Bangladesh it's mainly employing women. In Pakistan, most of the employees are male. So in terms of what we're doing in terms of the productivity measurement, what we're trying to do is to calculate productivity. How do we do that? Well, basically, we're measuring the efficiency by looking at the output minutes versus the input minutes. And what we need for that is something called an SMV, a standard minute value or allowance. That's how long it's supposed to take to produce a garment. So let me just back up a little bit. So for instance, in the production of a shirt or in the production of a pair of trousers, a pair of jeans, you can basically break down the garment into all the different component parts, like how long does it take to stitch the collar, how long does it take to stitch the sleeve, how long does it take to, so there's basically a certain amount of time which is allocated to each of these processes. So then, how long does it take to stitch the garment? Well, presumably what you do is you take, you sum up the amount of time that it's supposed to take for each of the component steps, and you add that up, and that's how long it's supposed to take to produce the garment. So this would be an example of that sort of operational breakdown. You have a number of operations, and then you have the length of time that it's supposed to take, and you add up all of those times, and then it says at the bottom the amount of time that it's supposed to take to stitch the garment. Now, in terms of yes, what we've noticed is that the wages are much higher in China and in Turkey. The wages are also rising. The labor costs are rising, but that's, of course, course, going to reflect to some extent the productivity of the workers. This is, again, also some information which was taken from the Indian consulting firm Technopat, where they have some nice comparisons of the productivity. So according to their calculations, they have Pakistan as a bit more efficient in terms of operational efficiency as compared to Bangladesh and India, but not as efficient as Vietnam, Indonesia, and China. So Pakistan is sort of in the mid-range here in terms of the efficiency, operational efficiency in this cross-country comparison. Now, this is not my work. This is Chris and Rocco's work in Bangladesh, where what they've done is they're looking at the line level productivity dispersion, and what they found is really huge dispersion in the productivity across lines. Now, the blue line, which is really spread out, is looking at is just looking at lines generally across factories, but without controlling for factory fixed effects. But then looking at within factories, that would be the red line, as we can see there. There's a lot less dispersion when you look across lines within a particular factory. But there is still a surprising amount of variation there. So for instance, if you have 10 lines, what these numbers are telling us is that the highest productivity line is 64% more efficient than the least efficient line in that factory. So there's a lot of dispersion there. And Chris and Rocco are working on trying to explain the sources of that dispersion. Now, what do we want to do with all this productivity data, with all this production data? What we want to do is we want to give the firms a tool. We want to be able to allow them to benchmark their own productivity against other firms, and also to look at the dispersion and their productivity across their lines. This is sort of a sample. This isn't the actual benchmarking tool, but this is something that we want to be able to give them. Would be some sort of tool for them to put in their data and for them to be able to look at themselves, look at their performance, and compare it with other firms. So what are our next steps? Well, like I said, we've just finished the collection of the production data, and we're just starting the supervisor survey. So it's going to take some time in the next few months. What we plan to do is to try to get this productivity data analyzed and get our line supervisor survey taken care of, and then to work on this pilot intervention. Like we said, we're thinking about working on something on the quality side, particularly with regard to information flows, how to get better information flows from the factory floor to upper management, and maybe we need to empower the operators a bit more in terms of monitoring the quality. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what the intervention we want to do, but we feel like quality is an important issue that we've noticed in all of our factory visits.
Thank you very much. This is supposed to be, it seems to be a very interesting study, but I would just like to add, I'd just like to comment on some aspects so that these are also, I'm sure they may be already on your agenda, but if you have missed any of these, then maybe you could include them. Because just let me give you the background of the Pakistani, how it grew, the Pakistani textile sector. Because we have cotton, and then spinning, ginning and spinning. So we have an entire supply chain in Pakistan. That means that in the beginning, this is before in the 1990s, there used to be vertically integrated units, which meant that because they were huge units and 70% of the exports were being made by these vertically integrated units, they were too large and could not adapt to changes in the international market demand. And therefore, because of that, they did not have flexibility, and generally they started declining. Their productivity declined, and also the wastage level was higher than most other smaller units which were there in India and Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, there were horizontal factories with like just garments. But in Pakistan, because of this supply chain, there used to be all these huge factories with starting from spinning to weaving and processing and then stitching. So that is why there were two studies. One was by World Bank in 2005, and the other one was recently by Werner and Gerzi, who did this productivity benchmarking in Pakistan. And in the garment sector, they had some findings. For example, they said that overall the productivity per capita productivity was very low because of lack of skills, and also because there were fewer women in the garment sector in Pakistan. But however, more important was that they said that the constraints were more in the big factories, and the smaller SME sector had more flexibility and also the most potential for improvement after certain studies or recommendations were made to them. So that way, these studies have sort of indicated certain policy directions as well. In the Ministry of Textile Industry, what we did was that we looked at all these studies and tried to develop the Textile Policy 2014-2019, which is a 5-year policy, and we included some of the things which would help to improve value addition in the ready-made garment sector. We do know that in Pakistan we have always been constrained because our garment sector contributes only $3.9 billion, and the rest of the $10 billion of exports comes from cotton, export of raw cotton, yarn, grey fabric, made-ups and processed fabrics. Now these are all comparatively low value added products. We also have problems about product diversification. We are producing 13 product lines, which are very important, and about 73 product lines which are generally, they comprise the entire export base, compared to about 820 lines which are unexplored, which means that we are not even, we haven't even started going into lingerie and beachwear and other value-added products, which we should be doing, especially now that we have GSP Plus, and we should not be wasting this opportunity on exporting volumes rather than high-value products. So in the textile policy, the focus was on 4 sectors, 4 policy intervention areas. One was skills development. Because of the high turnover in the textile sector, which is 10% every year, we need to go on producing skilled manpower. And the present capacity of the textile training institutes, including the universities, as well as the factories themselves, is very, very low. It's about 13 to 15,000 people a year, which is nothing compared to the demand, which is 0.27 million. So we are proposing under the new textile policy to train 120,000 people in the garment sector, in garment technology. Plus, we also have programs with ILO and other organizations for other programs. And then we also have this internship program with the mills. So these are the ways in which we hope that the value addition will be increased through better skills, because one of the major reasons for low value addition and low productivity is lack of skills. And then we are looking at market diversification, going towards new markets, apart from, because GSP Plus is obviously limited, we'll be sort of reaching the saturation point very quickly. And then we are also looking at intervention. Am I taking too long? Just give two more minutes. We're looking at interventions within the firms themselves through programs like the ILS with the ILO, that we are, there's an MOU being signed in Faisalabad between the ILO and the Pakistan Textile Exporters Association, so that there is going to be now intervention from the ILO trained people who would be guiding the industry and the associations on how to deal with productivity issues, labor issues, and general compliance issues. So these are interventions areas which we are encouraging and facilitating. And lastly, what we are targeting is that we want to double value addition in cotton. At present, Pakistan's value addition
is out of 1 million bales of cotton, we are producing just $1 billion. Whereas in India it is $2 billion and in China it is $4 billion out of the same 1 million bales of cotton. So the target is that within the next 3 or next 4 years, we have to double the value addition of cotton. So that is why our policies are at the moment quite broad-based, and I think I'd just like to end that for the first time in Pakistan's history, we have there's been political ownership of the textile sector because it was made part of the budget of 2014. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I must congratulate you for picking up such an important topic and at such a proper time. Why proper time? Because, like you mentioned, in China the wages are going high, the rates are going high, and this is the opportunity for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh to pick up that and have the business going. And very important because Pakistan presently lacks energy. The other problem is of youth bulge, which is coming 1.5 million people a year. We need to provide jobs for them. So all our strategies are hovering around job-enhancing growth and producing energy, or at least growth in the sector which consumes lesser energy. And garment sector actually, I think, fits in all of them. And the other pillar is of value addition and export-oriented. And this again, garment is one industry which can really fit in all growth strategies like no other industry can fit in. The value addition is, I'll just give an example, $1 spent in any other sector. In textile sector fetches $0.27, and in garment it fetches $3.2. This is the kind of value addition we are talking about. As far as the labor is concerned, 50,000 kgs of cloth, fabric, actually employs 400 people in textile, in all kinds of processes like weaving, finishing, etc. And in garment sector, the same kind of cloth fetches provides job for 1,600 people, so it's 4 times more. So that's why I'm saying it's a very important subject which you've taken up at this particular time. In Punjab, again, I would like to quote one example of collaboration between IGC and Punjab government, where a study was carried out for this garment sector, an overview sort of a study, not exactly maybe in detail. And sectors were, and the problems and the potential in garment sector were highlighted. They were actually presented to the policy makers on which the policy was developed. The groups were developed for each kind of problem and each kind of challenge which was faced by this industry. And working on that, now that policy actually has come up on the ground, and for the first time, Punjab government is now going for an apparel park and already spent 3 billion rupees on that, and now it's in the process. So this is a fine example of collaboration between IGC, the session in which we are sitting, maybe one of the research becomes a proper, it materializes and helps the policy makers to decide based on evidence which is provided by the researchers. With this, I think most of the things Secretary Textile has already highlighted. Another important thing is measuring the productivity, and I think one factor you have chosen already, how to measure this productivity across heterogeneous sort of jobs and works, because unless you can measure something, you cannot really measure the efficiency and cannot increase the productivity. The thing which cannot be measured, you can't set in any KPIs or any efficiency standards. So I think one universal measure for all kind of textile processes, garment processes, will be a good step forward. But besides that, I think if it's possible, you could also include the other factors which influence the productivity. It's not only this thing, but there could be many other factors which have been outlined earlier in earlier studies, but one of them could be really studied and researched by your group, and that can really help in enhancing the productivity of garment sector in Pakistan. We had already highlighted the challenges like skilled labor production, like policy, what kind of policy, import-export policy interventions are required, what kind of infrastructure is required for the industry, what are the habit patterns, what is the requirement of the labor. So all those issues are broadly listed. They just need to be researched further to improve the efficiency. So I would just request the group to look at the other factors as well, and we are expecting you there in Pakistan to move further on this in this direction. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, we're 10 minutes over time, and I really think that there are many interesting questions to be raised here. This is an example of the kind of work that's being done in the Pakistan program to strengthen firm capability. But I think, given the impatience back there, I think maybe we should just wrap up. I just want to offer one small comment as an illustration of the type of work IGC is doing and how that complements some of your own efforts and the efforts of the Textile Ministry. You see, that overview study that you talked about, I mean, Naved and I did it, and we know what the strengths are, and we are also very conscious of what the weaknesses of that study are. What Teresa Chaudhary and her collaborators are doing is that they are actually measuring both the benchmarking productivity, average productivity in Pakistani firms with firms in Bangladesh. But they're going a step beyond that. They're looking at the dispersion of productivity. In other words, within Pakistani firms, how productivity changes from the best performing firms to the least worst performing firms. This variation, and then explaining the causes of that variation. And that is where the factors that the policy needs to address will become much more sharply defined. And therefore, this study will go much further than what our study had done in terms of identifying the sources, because it actually measures the dispersion of productivity and then identifies the sources or explaining that dispersion. So I think once the study is done, you will see how valuable it is. It may end up supporting some of the things that the earliest studies had asserted. It may well dispute some of the things that the earlier studies had. But I think this is where the rubber meets the road, and therefore we really look forward to the completion of this study. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With this,
it's fine, thanks.
And then, so what we've got is Jeremy. Jeremy. Hi. Did you want any changes to Pakistan? Did you make any changes?
Sorry, George.
No, it's fine. We're getting Alan.
Sorry?
We're just getting Alan over the radio. Right, so what you do with this, you're, I don't know what just move these ones instead. So what we do is we always drag it onto the desktop just in case.
Yeah.
So we've got our Alan and our slide.
Sneak out this there.
Yeah, but we also today but then that is that well that's the bottom.
Hip scans.
Go ahead.
Yeah,